Okay, so you're all teachers or have learned about teaching and speak with students of all ages and types, but presenting formally in front of colleagues or adults sometimes can be challenging. Therefore, I put together a slideshow with helpful hints about presenting and facilitating with confidence. I think the first thing and most important thing to remember is that we teach people, not content. And although your presentation or workshop will focus on content and include content, think about what you're doing for teaching the people, teaching your participants, and that will help you think about all of the components that will be shared in this PowerPoint. One of the things to think about is how you move about the space as you are presenting or facilitating. There's a lot of reasons to do so to make your presentation effective. The first one being that learners are most likely to pay attention visually. So as you move around, they will be paying attention to you most likely because of the proximity of them to you and of you in the space. Another reason to move around is that it reduces stress on the part of you, the presenter. You don't have to feel like you're in one spot and stuck in that spot and have all eyes on you. When you move about, you're less anxious for the most part. The third reason is that proximity is a really good tool. And those of you who work with young students or students of any age, when you move yourself closer to a student who may not be paying attention or may be doing something you don't want them to be doing, you getting close to them will oftentimes make them stop doing what they were doing or refocus in a more positive way. So when you move out or away from a participant, it's one way to think about where your proximity is, moving closer to participants for various reasons to focus on a certain group of people in the room and so on. So think about moving around and what that does for you as the presenter and how it engages participants. The fourth reason, before you begin your presentation, really think about the different spots within the room. Where might be a good place to stand when you're talking about this? Or how do you place yourself when you want to talk to a small group? Just think about those specific spots. Think about using the entire room and using it to your advantage. The fifth reason of moving about a classroom or workshop space is to be able to introduce a topic that may encounter resistance. So if you know that your participants may not be happy or invested in your topic or idea, think about where your proximity to the group would be best taken. Do you need to stand farther away? Do you want to have more buy-in by moving closer to the audience? So standing far away from a group adds that distance. Coming closer to the group encourages more participation. And lastly, getting rid of lecterns or podiums, because that's an obstacle between you and your participants. You want to, again, focus on people, not the content, and therefore not having something between you and them is really helpful. No doubt you have your favorite ways of bringing back an audience, or bringing back participants after a group activity or after a break. Sometimes it's an uncomfortable time trying to get everyone's attention. As teachers, you may have your ways you use with young people that may or may not work with adults, but don't be afraid to try what you feel comfortable with. Some ways that might work, and again, you may not feel comfortable with some of these, but using music, playing music and turning it off when it's time to regroup might be helpful. Might be a way you want to use, using a chime or bells or a series of hand claps. Those are ways that could help bring everyone back. Raising your hand and saying, "Look this way, please," or "Pause, look this way." Using that both visual and auditory combination sometimes is helpful. Find ways that work for you and that work for your audience. I mean, different audiences may require different methods. For teachers, you may use methods you use with young children, and that might be okay. But with others from outside your school or educational setting doing presentations, you might have to come up with things that may seem a little more professional. Listening and speaking are two really important aspects of presenting. I want to share with you what's called the stop and look procedure that has been proven to be effective. So once you ask the audience for participation or ask a question and are awaiting response, one of the ways to do it in this procedure is to turn and look at each participant. And there may be a number of hands that are up who want to participate. What you will do as a facilitator is to put people in order of who is going to go first, second, and third. So for example, you see Fred's hand go up and then others, and you say, okay, Fred, I'll take your response first, followed by Kelly and by Claire back there in the corner. By doing this stop and look procedure, you're allowing yourself to give full attention to the speaker without worrying about who's going to answer next, both from your perspective and from the participants' perspective. They all know the order of how things will go, so they're not anticipating having to raise their hand to get their answer in. So after Fred is finished, the first speaker, you say, thank you, Fred, and now Kelly. And after that, you move on to Claire. And make sure you don't forget the order that you've established. So you don't want to call out too many people at once. So you have a long list of participants that you forget what order they went in. The other thing related to passing out handouts, don't do it while you're speaking. The best time to do it is when you're not talking, or assign it to someone else to pass out. But if you are the one passing out handouts, don't talk at that time. You want to keep eye contact with your participants. And so the quote that eye contact is so valuable, be wary about giving it away. As you move about passing out, people are concerned about getting the handouts rather than listening to what you have to say. Most presentations have a lot of vocalization, a lot of talking by the presenter or facilitator. Some things to remember are using your voice properly is important. Using variety in your speaking and in your tone can be very effective and helpful. You don't want to be speaking in monotone or speaking too fast. We all know those basics to remember. The second bullet point talks about being careful of using ums, and other verbalized phrases. Some of you may have noticed I have quite a few of those, or a few, I hope it's not too many, of those throughout this PowerPoint thus far. Be careful. Try not to use those. Give longer pauses between your thoughts so that you don't fill them with these verbalized phrases that can be really distracting. One of the other things that could be really helpful in planning for presentations and focusing on the vocalizations that you use is to videotape yourself and to look for distractions that you have in your voice or in your movement or other things as well. But using videotape to see how you present and some things that may be distracting for your audience or not as effective is a really helpful suggestion. On the last slide, I talked very briefly about using pauses in your speech and using them for the purpose of the vocalizations or the verbalized phrases that you want to take out of your presenting, such as So using pauses, as I said previously, is really helpful for that. There's other reasons to use pausing within presentations is that it allows you to rethink or to refocus your thinking and gives the audience or the group time to refocus as well and to think. So speaking more slowly, adding more pauses can be helpful in your presentation. The quote that's listed here, the pause is the single most powerful nonverbal signal that can be used. is really interesting. Think about it within your own teaching. When you pause, how does your audience or your students, how do they react? I'm not necessarily talking about long pauses, but watch for that as you teach. See how that can be really effective. You all probably have experienced presentations or sitting in workshops where the presenter adds a lot of humor into his or her session. It is a really helpful device when you're facilitating or presenting. And the quote, "In learning environments where healthy laughter is abundant, the environment is positive and learning is actually facilitated." Think about that within your own teaching or within sessions you have been in where humor has been integrated. There are positive effects associated with incorporating humor in any situation. Participants and others have a drop in your pulse rate. There's a secretion of endorphins and increased oxygen in the blood. It just helps to put people at ease. The other quote listed on this slide, "The use of appropriate humor assists in building a climate of connectedness and safety." And again, think about your own classrooms or your own experiences in group settings. Laughter does help people feel connected. Think about ways that you can incorporate humor. Self-deprecating humor is one way. Some people are more humorous than others. Not looking for you to be, a comedian in your presentations, but don't be afraid to get your audience laughing or chuckling in some way or another. I myself am not real good at that, something I'm constantly working at, but I do appreciate it in presentations of others. So I do like to watch comedians. I do like to watch really good presentations on TED Talks and so on, so that I can learn ways of incorporating more humor into my own facilitation. On this slide, you'll see some various things you might do to incorporate humor into your presentations. And again, pick and choose if you don't feel comfortable with one of them or some of them, but feel free to change them up a little bit. But the key is being yourself, incorporating humor in a way that's most comfortable to you. One of the other things that I really want to point out on this slide are the idea of not making fun of others or others' mistakes. Of course, making fun of your own is just fine. You don't want to overdo it because that can be hard for audience members to have to listen to. But the key on the bottom, that sarcasm towards participants or students, is a form of humor, but it's an inappropriate use of humor. It can demean and diminish the learning and higher level thinking in classrooms or in workshops. And I know a lot of teachers who use sarcasm, and I hesitate at times because it's not always helpful. I don't think it helps the students learn better or feel a part of the community through it. So be careful with the sarcasm that you use when you're presenting. Lastly, I'd like to share some tips for improving presentations. The best way to do that is to record yourself teaching or presenting. Watch the recording the first time without any sound, so you're just viewing what happens during your presentation. Look for any hand or arm gestures that you use that can be both beneficial but also could distract your audience. Something you may do repeatedly that can cause irritation to those watching over and over again. Observe how you interact with participants with the sound off. When you are listening to someone, how are you reacting? When you're responding to a question from someone, what does your body language tell you? When you are asking a question on your own, what are your interactions like? Then look at what you do with your hands while you're listening, while you're responding to questions or asking questions of your own. Are they appropriate? Are they distracting? When you do these things, are you facing the student or the participant? Look for those general kinds of things without sound on it. Then after doing that, block the visual of the recording and just listen to the audio component. Listen to your voice, listen to your vocal variety. Do you use high tones, low tones, up and down? Do you use a monotone type vocalization? Check for ums and you-knows. Next step is to watch the video with the audio and the video on. Again, watch your movement. Do you move to different places around the room? Do you have close proximity to the participants? Where do you focus most of your attention when you are speaking and or listening? Do you allow for wait time? Is it long enough? What effect does it have or not have if you don't use it well? If you had a visual such as a slideshow or other posters or what have you, how did you use it? Was it used effectively? Were you not reading from it word for word? What about you? Did you notice about your interaction with the participants now that you can see the movement, the visual, and the auditory together? Was it appropriate? Is there something you would like to do differently when you interact with the participants? And lastly, what about your body language? What did that look like? Did it look as if you were welcoming participants or encouraging them to be a part? Keep these things in mind. Try it a number of times. Things that you notice that you may not have been happy with, create a list and try to really focus on those things as you continue to do presentations or even within day-to-day teaching. I hope you found this presentation helpful and are not afraid to get in front of adults and do presentations and really focus on them first, the content and the ideas second.